All right, Detective, you're still under oath. Ms. Lazaro, I apologize for that interruption. Please proceed.
No problem. I'm sure everyone appreciated the break, so it's great. Thank you. Detective, just a couple more points I want to ask some questions on. There was some discussion during your testimony elicited by the state about CPR given when the night that Eric passed away, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you've reviewed the case file. Eric's body was found on a sheet on the floor at the foot of the bed, correct?
Correct.
And that was because when Corey was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, she was directed to remove him from the bed onto the floor by using the sheet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the 911 dispatcher told her to attempt to conduct CPR, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know if Corey's certified in CPR?
I do not.
Okay. And for someone in your training and experience, if someone doesn't know how to do CPR, it's entirely possible that although they may try, it may not be effective, correct?
Sure.
You also talked about what you refer to as bug-out bags, correct?
Correct.
I'm not from Utah, but given the amount of time I've been here, it's somewhat customary for people to prepare for things here, correct?
From my experience, yes.
Okay. So that would include like food storage, perhaps packing a bag, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And one of those bags was Eric's, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall a label with a date on that bag?
I don't recall a date, but I do recall from photographs seeing it labeled as Eric's, yes.
Okay. And did you said that there was identification documents in there, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that those are now expired?
No.
Okay. You came onto this case or when did you come onto this case?
In April of this year.
Okay. And took over as lead detective?
Yes.
And you, at some point after that, went to Corey's home, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And introduced yourself and asked her, do you remember me? You coached my son, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And who was the other detective with you?
Sergeant Hoffmeyer.
Okay. And Sergeant Hoffmeyer said, hey, I know your best friend. She coached my son, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And presumably, because you are the lead detective, you knew she was represented at that time, correct?
I was not aware of that.
Okay, so you had reviewed the entire case file and did not know she had a lawyer.
I had not reviewed the entire case file at the time that I approached Ms. Richens.
Okay.
I went to the house to introduce myself as the new detective so that she would know what was going on with the case.
Okay. Do you have any conversations with the district attorney's office prior to you talking to her?
I do not think so.
Okay. Were you aware of a letter in the file that I had sent to Detective Woody and specifically your office addressed to the Summit County Sheriff, Mr. Martinez, that I was counsel in the case?
I was not aware of that letter at the time.
Okay. And you discussed with Corey the case, correct?
After she invited us in, yes.
Did you ever ask her if she'd like a lawyer present?
Yes, at one point her mother came to the house and made a point of should she be talking to us, and I said, if you would like to have your attorney here, I'm fine with that.
Okay, but this was after you'd been talking to her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you, remind me the other detective's name again? I apologize.
Sergeant Hoffmeyer.
Hoffmeyer. Are you aware of a conversation between Sergeant Hoffmeyer and Corey where she asks why Detective Woody was removed from the case and he tells her for mishandling evidence?
No, I don't recall that.
Okay. Did he ever make mention of that?
On that date at that time, no, I don't believe so.
Okay. Was Detective Woody removed from the case?
She wasn't removed from the case. She changed divisions and could no longer fulfill those duties.
Okay, what is she doing now?
She's in patrol.
Traffic,
No, patrol.
patrol, as
Yes.
in like a line
Responding
patrol?
to emergency calls, yeah.
Okay, but
She's
she
also
was-
part of the K-9 unit.
So she went from being the lead detective in a murder investigation, potentially, to patrol, correct?
Yes, that's common for that to happen in our office.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bloodworth, anything further?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Within the scope of cross, please.
Detective, on cross-examination, Ms. Lazaro asked you about Ms. Richens' narrative from that night that she gave her husband a drink. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And she asked you about whether or not the police recovered a glass, a cup, a mug, some kind of container for that drink that evening. Remember that?
yes.
Were there any glasses or containers near the defendant that evening?
On the evening of the death, is that what you're referring to?
Correct. I guess it's the morning of the 4th when police arrived.
Right. I'm unsure without being there on scene. But from reviewing the body cam, I didn't see any.
Am I right that the only information that indeed Ms. Richens, Corey Richens, the defendant, gave her husband Eric Richens a drink was the defendant's own words, right?
Yes,
Ms. Lazaro had asked you about gaps in timeframes in cell phones. Based on the carrier records, what have you been able to determine about gaps, particularly from early January until shortly after the defendant's death?
we were able to determine from looking at the phone that it appeared that data from several different apps in the phone was missing in that time frame between January and just shortly after Eric Richens' death.
Let me turn now back to CL. On the very first time you met with CL, you testified that you kind of laid out kind of the predicament she was in, facing serious charges, but having potentially valuable information regarding a very serious death investigation, right?
Correct.
After that first meeting, how long until you began questioning her about the drug purchases?
For 4 or 5 days.
So you laid everything out for her on the first meeting and then gave her 4 or 5 days to consider whether she wanted to cooperate and then interviewed her substantively?
Correct.
Let me talk about that interview process. About how long after Eric Richens' death are you now interviewing CL?
Over a year,
And
here in a couple months.
in order to jog her memory, what, if anything, did you show her?
We showed her the contents of her phone that we seized from her home. We showed her applications, Google Maps, Google Earth. We showed her other witnesses' phones or screenshots of those phones.
And the other witnesses' phones or screenshots of those phones, you showed her screenshots of communications between her and that other witness
Correct.
with the idea that those communications might jog her memory?
Correct.
Is that kind of iterative approach of showing an interviewee information, is that common when you're interviewing somebody a year after the event which you're asking them to recall?
Yes, as from my experience, people have a difficulty recalling information, especially specific dates from that long ago.
Let me turn now to the April 13th, 2023 date when you introduced yourself to Ms. Richens, the defendant. What's the first thing the defendant did when you introduced yourself?
She invited us into the home.
And about how long did she talk?
3 hours.
Did she give any indication that she was very excited to talk to you and surprised you taking so long to come talk to her?
Yeah, she made multiple statements that she was glad the investigators were there to talk to her because she felt that she hadn't been in contact with the sheriff's office very frequently before that day.
And did there come one or even several times towards the end of the interview when you said your goodbyes, tried to leave, and she continued to talk?
Yes.
Subsequent to the interview, after you and Sergeant Hoffmeyer left, did she email Sergeant Hoffmeyer with some follow-up?
Yes, she sent an email with follow-up information to both I and Sergeant Hoffmeyer.
Your Honor, I'm going to mark, if agreeable, as State's Exhibit 1, a transcript of that April 13, 2023 interview.
Ms. Lazaro, have you seen it?
No.
You got to show it to Ms. Lazaro first.
Your Honor, Your Honor, counsel has the audio of the interview. It might just be audio in discovery already.
Is that correct?
I believe so. There's a lot there. I
Okay.
haven't, but
All right.
we can proceed for today's purposes.
Your Honor,
good.
for purposes of today's hearing, the State would like to move this into evidence as Exhibit 1. The State asks that the court file it private at this point. We weren't sure this was going to come up today. We may need to redact some names from it before it goes public.
Yeah, we're not going to put it in the docket at all, but it can be admitted for, as States 1, for the purposes of today's detention hearing.
Thank you, Your
All
Honor.
right.
Detective O'Driscoll, you recall Ms. Lazaro asked you some questions about interviewing somebody with the initials JS, correct?
Correct.
And you said you interviewed JS approximately April the 20th, 2023, right?
Correct.
And at that point, how long had you been the lead detective on the investigation?
Less than 2 weeks.
And you told, I think you testified, you told JS something like, you thought there were three alternatives here. One was an accidental death, an accidental overdose, suicide, or homicide. Is that right?
Correct.
At that point in your investigation, were you looking into and investigating all three of those alternatives?
Yes, at that time, I had little information about the case other than the couple of interviews that I had conducted, and I was trying to keep an open mind to all the possibilities.
Thank you. No further questions.
One second.
We're good, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further, Ms. Lazaro?
No, that's
You can step down, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
The state's next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Chris Kotrodemus.
Sir, if you'd step in front of Brittany, we'll get you sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter before the court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, subject to the pains and penalties of perjury? Thank you. Please have a seat.
Sir, could you please tell us your name and spell your last name?
Sure, it's Chris Kotrodemus. Last name is K-O-T-R-O-D-I-M-O-S.
Thank you. Mr. Kotrodemus, how are you employed at this point in time?
I own a private investigation firm,
What's that called?
M20 Solutions,
How long have you been the owner of that firm?
about 7 months.
What did you do prior to owning that business?
I was a police officer for over 23 years.
And where did you work as a police officer?
I started my career in Raleigh, North Carolina. I moved to Utah and took a position with Salt Lake City Police Department, where I worked on the homicide unit there. In 2017, I took a position with the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office on the homicide team there, and until my retirement in December of 2022.
Do you have any specialized education, training, or experience with forensic digital evidence?
I do, yes.
Could you briefly explain what that is?
Sure. So I've attended several formal courses, one being a Cellbrite Certified Operator course, Cellbrite Certified Physical Analyzer course. I've also attended a 40-hour cell phone analysis and mapping course through ZX. After using those skills for several years, I also attended a ZX 40-hour subject matter expert course on the same subject, cell phone, social media mapping, those types of things. My experience related to my testimony on those courses is I've worked either directly or indirectly on more than 200 homicides and major crimes. I've inspected and evaluated thousands of phone and social media records and phone downloads.
Thank you. What is your role in the case that brings you to court today?
I was retained by the Summit County Attorney's Office to evaluate digital evidence in this case.
And what evidence have you reviewed?
I reviewed several cell phone downloads or extractions. I've reviewed and analyzed call detail records and some social media records, things like that.
Can you tell us what the difference between carrier records and call data records are?
Yeah, so a call data record or a cell download is kind of what it's commonly called, is information that is extracted or downloaded from a phone onto some type of media, external drive, things like that. And it does so into a reader in which you're able to analyze the data that's contained within a device. That's a cell phone extraction or download. A carrier record or a call detail record is the regular record that you would have. It's the usage of the phone through your carrier. So it records the date and times of your calls, your texts, your data usage for a given period of time. And it can include location information, such as like tower data.
Can there be discrepancies between carrier records and the data that's extracted from a device?
Yes.
What would cause that?
Usually, sometimes it's because it just wasn't captured in the phone download due to a software limitation, but typically where we see it is through deletion of information on the device that does not match the carrier records that we receive from the phone company.
Did you analyze forensic extractions of an iPhone belonging to the defendant that was seized April 13th of 2022?
I did.
Does it contain digital information pertaining to the night of March 3rd and into the morning of March 4th, 2022?
It does.
What does that phone show? Well, let me ask it this way. What is the last time that phone is used on March 3rd of 2022?
The last activity reported on the defendant's phone is an activity device movement at 22:33 hours or 10:33 p.m. on March 3rd.
When was the next time that phone was used?
The phone was inactive and then ultimately unlocked at 3:07 a.m. on March 4th, 2022.
Was there anything that happened between those two timeframes?
On that device?
On
No.
that device?
No.
Does the extraction of that phone indicate if it was moved in that time frame?
It does.
And how are you able to tell that?
Through the download, in this case, we use Cellbrite for the download. In the download, it gives an activity, like a connected device activity movement. Usually that's an indicator of another connected device, such as a tablet or a smartwatch or something of that nature. Those
And-
two, yeah, I'm sorry, those two devices will communicate with each other and report potential movement of the phone through that application.
Was there anything significant that occurred at 3:22 hours on March 4th?
At 3:22, yes, a 911 call was made.
So between the time that the phone is used at 3:07 that morning and 3:22, is there any activity that could be seen from the download?
There is.
What is that?
At 3:07, the device is unlocked. At 3:08 a.m., the device reports some type of movement, either the device itself or a connected device is moving. At 3:12, the phone was unlocked. At 3:16, the phone was unlocked again. At 3:19, the phone was unlocked again, potentially twice. There was movement again at 3:21, and then at 3:22, the 911 call was made.
So roughly a time frame of 15 minutes between the first time that phone is used and the time that a 911 call is placed.
Correct.
Now, the attached device that's recording movement, could that be an Apple Watch?
It could be.
Do you have any way of telling from the extraction you examined what that device was that was recording that movement?
So far in the extraction, I have not been able to. I may at some point, but at this point, no.
And as far as the movement, what kind of movement is this? Is it significant?
It is significant, I think, for it occurring in a home.
And can you explain what that movement was?
Correct. So at 3:08, there's movement on the phone, or on a device is connected to that phone is moving. And it moves, I don't remember the exact amount of time, but I believe it's several feet. I do know that at some point, there was two movements right before the 911 call, and they're both significant. One was about 240 feet, it was like 74 meters and change. And the other one was about 130 feet. And this is right before the 911 call.
Okay, thank you. As you were analyzing the forensic data from that extraction, were you able to observe any noticeable patterns of deletion from that phone?
It appears that there is some deletion in that device.
Okay, and can you describe what is being deleted in that phone?
It looks like there's gaps in things like web history, web searches, particularly the call log. When a person makes or receives a call or a text, those are recorded in the call log of the phone. And there are there's messaging that is included in the carrier report, the call detail record, that I would expect to see also logged within the device that are not in the device.
Okay, so you're seeing those in the carrier records, but not on the device themselves?
Correct. For instance, there's multiple calls and texts to an individual. I would expect to also see that retained in the call log of the device itself. And in a lot of instances, particularly in the weeks prior to the death, there's a lot of that is missing.
And from the carrier records, are you able to tell who those calls were going to?
Yes,
Who was that?
there are several people. But as it relates to this case, one that stood out was a witness that has been mentioned as CL.
In those carrier records, were there logs of calls made to CL in January of 2022?
I don't recall January.
Did you analyze a forensic extraction of a second iPhone belonging to the defendant that was seized in May of 2023?
Yes.
When did activity begin on that phone?
The activity on that phone started shortly after her original phone was seized in April of 2022.
Were you able to observe internet searches on that phone?
Yes,
And did you create a PowerPoint of some of those searches?
I did.
And just for the court and council's reference, this is docket item 141. Were you able to tell when those searches were done?
Yes.
How did you do that?
There is a date and time stamp of the history, the web history. So for instance, if you visit a website and you click through it using your device, it will report what date and time that you did that, connected to that website.
I see. On April 18th of 2022, did the phone access an internet site of an article entitled "What Happens to Deleted Messages"?
Yes,
On May 10th of 2022, did that phone access a site for an article entitled "How Do Police and Forensic Analysts Recover Deleted Data from Phones"?
yes,
Did that phone ever, was a query placed in that phone, quote, "Can cops, period, uncover deleted, period, messages, iPhone," close quote?
yes,
Did that phone search, quote, "How to, period, permanently delete information from an iPhone remotely," close quote?
yes,
Did that phone search, quote, "Luxury prisons for the rich in America"?
it did.
Did that phone search, quote, "If someone is poisoned, what does it go down on the death certificate as," close quote?
Yes.
Were you able to tell when those things were searched?
The search themselves, there was no date and time reported for the individual search. However, I found corresponding websites to those searches that did have the dates and times in the web history.
And was there a certain time frame that these searches were made?
They were.
Can you describe what that was?
It was typically between, well, shortly after her original phone was seized. So from April, middle of April of 2022 through, memory serves me right, about August of 2022, off and on.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned your training with cell phone mapping using cell tower data.
Yes,
Have you employed that in your review of the evidence in this case?
I have.
And specifically, can you explain just briefly how cell phone mapping is done using cell phone,
Sure.
cell tower data?
Sure. Sorry I look that way. I'm used to talking to a jury. So cell mapping is accomplished by taking call detail records that contain tower location in them and putting them into a piece of software that will visually show you a location on a map of which tower that device was accessing when it made or received a call or a text. So it takes lines of data and creates a map out of it.
Okay. And is that plotted on like a program like Google Earth?
It is.
Okay. And are you able to tell any directionality from when a phone connects to a tower? Is there any directionality to that where you can tell approximately where that phone is transmitting from?
Yes, yeah. So the cell phone, the companies report which tower the device is utilizing and which sector. There's an estimated range to that, which is a bit ambiguous on the range. However, it will tell us at least what side of the tower that the device was located when it made or received the call or text.
How many sectors are there on each cell tower?
Typically 3.
Okay. And so if a phone is connecting to a tower through a certain sector, can you tell that it's someplace where that sector is for lack of a better word, broadcasting or collecting signals?
Yeah, so we can determine the orientation of the device to certain locations.
I see.
Yeah.
Did you map data from CL's phone extraction?
I did.
Were you able to track that phone's movements on February 11th of 2022?
Yes,
At any time, was it at or near a Maverick gas station in Draper, Utah?
it is.
And are you aware of the significance of that location in this investigation?
I am.
And what is that?
This is the location that CL had indicated to detectives that she bought drugs on behalf of the defendant.
Do you recall approximately what time of day that was it was there?
She shows up on that tower near that Maverick at about 6:49 p.m. and remains there until about 8 p.m. on February 11th, 2022.
Does that phone make any calls or send any texts while at that location?
It did.
And to anyone notable to this investigation?
Yes, 2 people.
Who was that?
One would be to another acquaintance in which CL indicated she had purchased the drugs from, and CL was also texting with the defendant.
Well, she was at a gas station in Draper purchasing narcotics.
Correct.
On that day, did the phone go to a did the phone go to a location in Heber City?
It did.
Was the mapping that you did of CL's phone consistent with the account that CL gave to law enforcement regarding that first drug purchase?
Yes.
Were you able to track CL's phone movements on March 9th of 2022?
Yes,
Was the phone ever in Francis, Utah on that day?
it was.
Was it ever at or near the same Maverick in Draper, Utah?
It was.
Were there any communications from the phone at that time while it was at the Maverick?
Yes, at the Maverick, yes.
Did it communicate with any phone belonging to a person relevant to this investigation?
It did.
Who was that?
At the Maverick, it communicated with, I guess, corroborating witnesses to the drug purchase on the 9th. When the device was utilizing a tower in Francis, it was about midday on March 9th, and CL's phone was in communication with the defendant's phone.
Thank you. While she was in Francis, Utah.
Correct.
Did the phone go to a location in Midway, Utah on or about that day?
Yes.
Are the movements that you tracked for CL's cell phone on March 9th of 2022 consistent with the information she gave to law enforcement in this investigation?
Yes.
Finally, I want to speak with you briefly about Mr. Eric Richen's phone. Did you analyze a forensic extraction of his phone?
I did.
When was the last use recorded from Eric's phone?
From memory, I believe it was about 9:58 p.m. on March 3rd, 2022.
And are the times that are on the extraction from that are populated in the Celebrite download, are those, what time zone are those given in?
Typically, the extraction is provided in UTC 0.
Okay.
Yes.
And so can you just briefly explain what UTC 0 is?
Right, so UTC 0 is Greenwich Mean Time. It's an effort by people that utilize data and do data investigations to try and keep everybody on the same time zone. Utah is in UTC -7 during standard daylight time, and we are in -6 in daylight savings time. So from November, in this case, from November of 2022 to about March 13th, November of 2021 to March, I believe it was March 13th, 2022. Local time in Utah was UTC -7.
Okay. So if those times are given on that download as UTC -5, that would be Eastern Standard Time?
Correct. It would be 2 hours ahead of local Utah time.
So to adjust for Mountain Standard Time, you would have to go back 2 hours?
You'd have to subtract 2 hours, yes,
Okay.
sir.
And that's what gave you, can you repeat that, the last time that Eric's phone was used on March 3rd?
I believe it was 9:58 PM on March 3rd.
Okay, thank you. If I could just have one moment, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Cotrodemus. Those are all of my questions at this time. Thank you.
Counsel.
Just a couple. You testified there are essentially two explanations for why things might be missing. One in a download. One is that it's not captured in the download, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that can happen.
It can.
Okay. And then the other is whether or not it's been deleted.
Correct.
Okay. In this case, all you can say definitively is that it's missing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, with regard to movement, that could be any device that is essentially attached to the phone through an app, correct?
It could be, yes.
Okay, and so you can't say, looking at what you analyzed, exactly what device that was, correct?
So far, no.
Okay, and you can't tell where that device was in terms of location, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it's possible that that could have been a device attached to it from some other location, but the phone's recording it, correct?
It would be unlikely.
But it's possible, if it's connected to an app,
It depends on the range.
okay?
So it would be impossible outside a certain range.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a number of different ways to, or different programs, and forgive me, I am not an expert in this, so. There's a number of different programs or extractions that can be done on phones, correct?
Correct.
Or different ways to do them.
Correct.
Okay. Did you perform an independent extraction on this phone?
I did not.
Okay, or on any of the phones you've talked about today?
No.
Okay. Did you analyze any data prior to January of 2022 on either CL's phone or either phone, or I guess the first phone belonging to Ms. Richens?
I don't believe I did.
Okay, were you asked to only look at a particular date range?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Were you given the date range of interest?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you didn't cross-reference any communication or the frequency of communication between CL and Corey prior to January of 2022, correct?
Correct.
So it could be that they communicated all the time and you wouldn't have known.
Yes.
So this could have been just a normal course of communication between the two.
Sure. Yes.
Were you made aware of when the search warrant was, or when the first phone was seized?
Yes.
Okay. And were you given a copy of the search warrant?
No.
Okay. Were you made aware that the search warrant included evidence of homicide that they were looking at?
No.
Okay. And in that first phone, prior to Eric passing away, were you able to review any search history of the web browser
Of whose device?
on the first device of Ms. Richens?
Of Ms. Reed? Yes. Yes.
Okay. And were there any searches related to fentanyl on that?
Not that I found it. There were not many searches available to
And,
look at.
okay, no searches related to prisons either?
No, not in that timeframe.
Okay. No searches related to deleting messages?
No.
And so all the searches came from the second phone, correct?
The web searches mentioned,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that was the phone that was seized after the search warrant was issued for the first phone, correct?
That was, yes.
Because that's the
So
phone
that
she
wa-
got as a replacement, right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
I just want to return to this mapping, or move to this mapping that you discussed. Did you look at the mapping on the second phone of Ms. Richens?
I did not.
Okay. So the state didn't ask you to compare Ms. Richens' phone to CL's location at any point, correct?
They did.
Okay.
Yes, they did.
But you couldn't do it? Or didn't
No.
do it?
The records, the mapping location for those call detail records through Verizon are no longer available
On the second phone?
on either phone.
Okay. So you were able to get them off of CL's phone, but because of Verizon, you weren't able to get them on Ms. Richens' phone?
Correct.
Okay. And on that March 9th date, you discussed her being in Francis midday in the Maverick. What time was she at that Maverick?
It was about 3 p.m.,
Okay, so after she'd
2
been.
or 3 p.m.
After she'd been to,
She was
To Francis.
she was in Francis around midday,
okay,
and she was at the Maverick at about 2:33 p.m.
okay. Did she go back to Francis?
She went to Heber.
Okay. And she lives in Heber?
She does.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Heller, anything further?
No, thank you.
So you can step down. Thank you. Ms. Casella.
Yes, Your Honor, statement called Brooke Carrington.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter before the court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, subject to the pains and penalties of perjury? Thank you. Please have a seat.
Morning.
Morning.
Could you state your name and spell your last name, please?
Brooke Carrington, Karrington.
How are you employed?
I am a principal managing partner at Carrington France Financial Forensics.
Is this a company that you started?
Yes, it is.
And when did you do that?
Officially in, I think 2012, when I registered that business, but I'd been doing this for about 35 years.
What's the nature of your business?
I look at, most of the casework I get is forensic accounting, and most of the casework is cases where there are allegations of fraud or missing or misappropriated funds, tracing of bank transactions, and casework like that.
And how long have you been doing that?
35 years next month.
Do you have an undergraduate degree?
I do.
What is it in?
It's in English.
And what about a graduate degree?
I have an MBA.
Do you have any certifications or other degrees?
Yes, I am a certified fraud examiner. I also am certified in anti-money laundering transactions. I am also working towards certification in blockchain and cryptocurrency.
So this is probably going to be a lot, but in your 35 years of forensic accounting, how many cases have you worked on?
A couple of years ago, I had to quantify that, and at that time, it was about 4,600, so
So probably more now.
more now.
Okay. Have you provided testimony in financial crimes cases?
Yes, I have.
How often?
A handful of times per year, I would say.
Okay. How did you first get involved in this case?
I was originally contacted by the investigator for the estate of Eric Richens,
And who's that?
Todd Gabler.
Okay. And why did he contact you, or what was his reason for contacting you?
Mr. Gabler and I have been acquaintances and colleagues for 30 years, and he expressed to me that I have a skill set that he knows nothing about, so.
Okay. And who hired you?
The estate hired me initially.
Okay. And at some point, were you retained by the Summit County Attorney's Office?
Yes,
When was that?
I believe it was May 31st of this year, just a couple weeks ago.
Okay. So as part of your being hired by the estate and being retained by the Summit County Attorney's Office, have you reviewed any documents that are relevant in this case?
Yes,
What have you reviewed?
I've reviewed bank account statements, tax return documents, real property records, specifically trust deeds and warranty deeds, reconveyances. I've also reviewed insurance policy documents, tax information.
Okay. Specifically with respect to the defendant, were you able to determine whether or not she owns any businesses?
Yes,
What business does she own?
she owns several businesses, and the most relevant one to this case, I believe, is K. Richens Realty LLC.
Okay. What kind of business is that?
It's in the business, in the realty business, real estate business, and I understand she flips homes, but she also acts as a realtor representing people who are purchasing homes.
Okay. And when did she start this business?
It was registered in Utah in April of 2019.
All right. Were you able to find information regarding the defendant's buying and selling of homes?
Yes.
And how did you find that information out?
Those documents are typically recorded, and they are public documents, and they're typically recorded at counties, recorder's offices. There's also information along that line at the assessor offices, and each state has a little bit different process of doing them. Most of them do it the same way that Utah does, which is through the county recorder.
Okay. I'm going to show you, if I may approach, Your Honor, what's been marked as State's Exhibit 2. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
This is a schedule that I prepared. I use the term schedule to talk about my work product and the analysis and how I depict it. So this is a chronology of the real properties that I was able to identify attached to either Corey personal, Ms. Richens personally, or through her company.
Okay. Does it show a timeline of acquisitions that she has made?
Yes, and I should underscore, this is a timeline that they were acquired.
Okay.
So just, this is the front end of her ownership.
Okay. And in 2019, and this is when her business was started, is that correct?
That's correct.
How many homes so far have you been able to tell whether or not, were acquired by the defendant?
In 2019?
Yes.
In 2019, I have two properties listed. One of them is the home that they were living in, and that's when the HELOC was taken out. And the other one is a different property. So I've listed two there.
And you've listed an amount of trust deeds for 2019, is that right?
That's correct.
Can you explain what those are?
Trust deeds are deeds that are recorded at the county recorder's office, and they are memorializing or documenting an obligation or an encumbrance on a property. So this would represent that there's a loan for a certain amount, and that's expressed and documented in a trust deed.
Okay. And how much money, I guess, in trust deeds, or what was the amount of the trust deeds in 2019?
Those two trust deeds total $471,210.48.
And you've done that for each year, 2020 and 2021 as well, right?
That's correct.
And what was the amount in 2020 of trust deeds?
2020 was $2,069,280.
On how many properties?
On 5.
Okay, and 2021, what was the amount of trust deeds and that the defendant acquired?
The amount there is $6,260,458
On how many properties?
on 13.
Do you find this significant,
Yes.
and why?
On a positive note, it depicts that the business was growing and she was actively acquiring properties. I think it's noteworthy and it's an indication that things were growing quite significantly, and sometimes that is problematic.
And why is it problematic?
Well, it's kind of a basic thing like in business school where growth too fast, too strong, too robustly is challenging for a business.
Okay. Were you able to determine at the end of 2021 how much the defendant was obligated on those debts, those $6 million debts? And actually explain to me the difference. What does obligated on a debt mean?
That's a very important question and a very, very important point to understand here. I don't have access at this point to the documents that tell me the terms of these loans. So I don't know what the interest rate is of these loans. I don't know the terms that she's agreed to for these loans. I don't know what payment is required on these loans. What I do know is these are what we colloquially call hard money lenders. And I do know on some of these what these lenders do require, and it's in the neighborhood of 12 to 15%. These are not conventional loans where there's a 30-year payment amortization. These are typically short-term loans, and people in the house flipping business, the fix and flip business, typically are turning those over a little more quickly, so they don't need a 30-year loan. They need a shorter-term loan. So I understand what she's obligated on, but I do not know what the balance is at the end of a particular time period.
I see. You need more information to make that determination, is that right?
That's correct, and that would be the loan documents themselves, the promissory notes, and the ledgers from the lenders to show what payments were or were not made and when were they made, how the interest was calculated and accrued, what other fees. Typically, these lenders have significant loan origination fees, and if payments are late, then the interest rate is higher on the late payment. There are perhaps default fees, things like that.
Okay. So do you have a rough estimate on what she was obligated to at the end of 2021?
Yes.
And what's that?
The end of 2021
Yes.
was a little over $4 million.
Okay. And you don't know if that's you don't know what she had paid back, but you know that was what, at that point, she was obligated on.
That's what she was obligated on these properties that she still owned at that time. And this is, I believe I've done a pretty good job looking for properties, but there may be others
Okay.
that I don't know about.
Okay. Were you able to look at bank accounts that belonged to the defendant?
Yes.
And what is servicing a debt? What does that mean?
That would be a term that would explain that there is a debt outstanding, and servicing a debt would be the payments on that debt. So if I have a credit card and I have a monthly payment, or I have a balance due, my payment toward that credit card is called servicing my debt.
Okay. And were you able to determine how much debt the defendant was servicing in December of 2021, for instance?
Yes.
How much was that?
The debt payments?
Yes.
The debt payments were about $252,000 in that month.
Were you able to
Say that
do?
one more time.
The debt payments that she made in December of 2021, there were 94 payments, and those 94 payments totaled $252,000.
Is there anything that you found significant about those debt payments?
Yes.
What was that?
They were not to 94 individual entities. Some of them were weekly payments. For example, I know that she has an outstanding debt during that time of $5,438 that was required to be paid weekly on a debt. She has a $600 payment that is made daily for a period of time during December. And the payees on most of those debts, the large majority of those debts are hard money lenders. Some of them are credit cards.
And this was in a particular account you looked at,
That's
correct?
just in one account, yes.
And do you remember what account that was?
That's the account 6577.
Okay. Were you able to determine if she was current on her debt payments that were coming out of 6577? Did I say that number correct? Yes.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
I know of one account that she has that had sued her, and they filed suit in New York in December 9th of 2021.
Okay. But, to ask you about that, I will ask you about that one in a minute. But
Okay.
were you able to look at the bank account and determine whether or not she was current on her payments, or whether her payments were going through correctly?
I can't tell you if she was current on her payments. I can say about those payments that several of them did not clear the bank. And during.
Why was that?
She was in the negative in that account from a good part of that month. She was $22,000 in the hole for a good part of that month.
So you noticed that, at least for that account in that month, that that some of the payments to the hard money lenders were not going through?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you notice any, charges for overdraft fees or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay, well, what did you notice about that?
They were $25 each, and sorry, I don't recall what the cumulative number is for that, but there were dozens.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about this. You said that there was a lawsuit that you were familiar with out of New York.
Yes.
Can you explain what you found out about that?
So in that case, they did file the agreement. And so from that, it's apparent that Ms. Richens used receivables of $87,000. And receivables are her potential revenue. It's work that she's performed or earned, and she's expecting to be paid this money to her company as revenues. So that's $87,000 that's stated in the case, in the document that they filed with it. And that agreement also says that she's borrowing $60,000 against that $87,000 at 15%. And that document also spells out the terms of the agreement that she's to make weekly payments of $5,438 until that debt is paid.
And do you know why this lawsuit was brought? Or what the documents indicate about why the lawsuit was brought?
According to the complaint, which is the other side's version of what happened, that she made payments of about $21,000. So that would be a little shy of 4 payments. And then after that, she defaulted.
Okay. And when was that lawsuit filed?
December 9th, 2021.
So we talked a little bit about the bank accounts, at least do you know where the K. Richens Realty bank account, what the bank is?
Where they banked?
Where they banked?
Yes. That's
What
it.
is that?
America First Credit Union.
Okay. And were there any other America First Credit Union accounts that you were able to look at?
Yes.
And when were you able to look at those?
Over this past weekend.
Okay. How many accounts did you get access to?
Probably about 11 or 12.
Okay. Were some significant?
Yes,
Were some not?
that's correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask you specifically about each of these in order, or not each of them, but a couple of them in order. There's the 6577, is that right?
That's correct.
What was, and that was the K. Richens Realty, right?
That's primarily, that is the name of the account, and that's, as far as I can tell, that's primarily where the transactions were housed.
And you said primarily the hard money lending payments?
Primarily there.
Okay. And that one ended up in about negative 2,200 at the end of 2021.
22,000.
22,000. I'm sorry, you're right, 22,000. Did you look at 2204?
Yes.
What primarily was that?
That's the joint account, so we would call that a personal account. It's a joint account. It's held jointly with Eric and Corey Richens.
Anything stand out in that account to you?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, it's important to me to look at kind of a runway of the account leading up to a significant time period, because it's important to understand the nature of an account. And so I've gone back to 2020, long before the review period that's relevant specifically in this case, or that is people are concerned about in this case, to understand what the nature is and what's the character of that account. How is it used and what's typical for a particular account holder. And that's going to be different for every person and every business. And so I looked at this account, and typically it is the account that is used to pay credit cards and kids' expenses and family expenses and things like that.
Okay. Anything else stand out as you reviewed the account?
Yes, as we get closer to the time period that's relevant here, which is like the months leading up to Eric's death, I would term that, and then what happened after. There are transfers between accounts and amongst accounts. I can see, Eric's payroll coming into that account. I can see there are some deposits or transfers, I guess should say, from K. Richens Realty, payments going back to K. Richens Realty. There's a marked increase in the number of transactions that occur in that account and all of the accounts.
Okay. So you actually see an increase of money moving around in that account, say, late 2021 and up until Eric's death?
That's correct, yes.
Why is that significant? Why do you find that significant?
Well, I'm looking for what's typical or what makes sense. And so I'm looking at, what's happening in the business account, and does that influence what happens in the personal account, along with what is happening in the acquisition of properties and how those move together. And so there's this kind of noteworthy crescendo that happens in the months leading up to Eric's death. There are indicators of an increase of chaos and loss of control and larger amounts of money moving all around the accounts.
In a positive way or a negative way?
It feels haphazard. There's not a pattern, there's not a practice that there had been a little bit earlier in my review. And there are transactions that don't clear when there's, money is moving around just to cover transactions.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you about those transactions that don't clear in a minute. But I'm going to go to ask you about account 5244. Are you familiar with that account?
Yes.
What is that account?
That is also a personal account. That was opened in 2013, and the header on the bank statement has Corey's name, but the signature card, and until I looked at the signature card, I thought that was just Corey's account, but the signature card does have Eric and Corey as joint holders.
And what is that, what do you believe that's primarily focused when you review of that account?
I thought that was a business account.
Okay, is that what you continue to think? I mean, I guess you're.
It's technically a personal account.
Okay.
According to America First, that's a personal account, but it is used as a business account.
And why do you say that?
Because of the transactions that are contained within the account.
What kind of transactions are they?
There are some payments for the loans on these properties. There are expenses that I would think would be typical of a business rather than personal. But there are some personal expenses there. I'm not saying that to be prejudicial or negative or anything. It is what it is.
Okay. Are there any credit card payments coming out of that account?
Yes.
How many credit card, or what's the amount of credit card payments coming out of that account?
I didn't quantify that.
Okay. So at the end of, did you review the bank statement for that account, the 5244, for the end of 2021?
Yes.
What was the status of the account then?
That was also in the negative. It was in negative about 1,100, 1,700, something like that.
Was there a line of credit?
Yes, there was.
How much was the line of credit?
3,200,
And what was the status of the line of credit?
and that was exceeded.
Okay.
That was tapped out.
Okay. So you mentioned some, I guess, transactions that did not clear. Is that how you put that?
That I did, yes.
Okay. And where did those, in what accounts were there transactions that did not clear? Do you remember?
I know the 6577 account, 5244 account, the 5244 is the one we've just been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The 2204 account is the personal account, the joint personal account, and that also had a lot of money moving in and out and did have some transactions that did not clear.
So I'm going to direct your attention to a transaction that occurred on October 13th of 2021. Do you remember looking at that? Where there was a check coming in from a credit union?
October 23rd of 2021,
13th,
October, for what amount?
for $4,000.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me, and that was into 6577, is that right? Is that, if that's?
I believe so. Are we talking about 2021?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was from Penn Fed. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me about that? What you recall about that transaction?
Penn Fed Credit Union is a credit union where Corey Richens has accounts and Eric does not, and that becomes a significant issue later. But That check was deposited into the account, and then it was returned unpaid.
And do you recall if there were any transactions made out of the account between the time the check was deposited and it came back unpaid?
I recall that there were transactions, yes.
Okay. And there was another couple of checks were deposited on November 12th of 2021 that did not clear. Do you remember those?
I remember that there were checks, yes.
Okay. And after those checks were deposited, do you remember if there were any payments made out of the account before it came back unpaid? Sorry.
The same is true, yes.
And do you remember who those were transferred to, or where they were transferred?
I don't recall specifically, no.
Okay. But there was money transferred out between the time the check was deposited that didn't clear and the time it
That's
didn't.
correct.
Okay. And then in December 23rd of 2021, do you recall any checks that were deposited, a check for $10,000 and from the Navy Federal Credit Union?
Yes,
And what happened to that check?
that did not clear as well.
Okay. And checks take a while not to clear, right? Is that right? So a check is deposited, it's credited to your account, but there's some time in between the credit and the coming back not cleared. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, but it depends on the relationships between those financial institutions. Sometimes they'll clear overnight, sometimes they'll take a few days.
Now, these seem to take about 4 or 5 days. Would that be about right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I remember that there were two that did not clear, and they both came from Ms. Richens' Navy Federal Credit Union account.
So these were checks written by the defendant and on the Navy Federal Credit Union account and deposited into her America First credit.
That's correct.
That didn't. Was there money between the time that the check was deposited and the time it came back as unpaid? Were there any transactions out of that 6577 account?
Yes, there were.
And what were they?
I don't recall.
Okay. But there was a time when the money was moved out of those accounts.
That's correct.
Okay. In 6577, do you recall, I know you testified that it was overdrawn at the end of the year. Do you recall if it was overdrawn again prior to Eric's death?
I do. I don't remember the amount, but it was, again,
Overdrawn?
yes.
Okay. Do you, and again, I want to ask you about go back to 5244.
Ms.
And I think,
Cassell, I think we can move on from the accounts.
okay. Let me ask you about the life insurance policies. Are you familiar with life insurance policies
Yes.
on Eric's life?
Yes.
How many life insurance policies were there on Eric's life at the time of his death?
I believe there were 6.
Okay. And
7.
what were they? Can you explain what the life insurance policies were?
Yes. The first was through Minnesota Life for $347,000, and that was what is typically called a home mortgage policy, in which if the insured passes away, the home's paid off, and they write it at the amount of what the loan balance was at the time the policy's taken out. And so whatever the loan is at the time of death, I believe that loan is like 72%. They'll pay 72% of the outstanding loan. And so that one was paid.
Okay.
And then there's a life insurance policy that Eric and his business partner had on each other, basically, and that's in coordination with a buy-sell agreement on their business. And so if one of them passes away, the other would be the beneficiary of that life insurance policy.
So let me just ask you about instead of going through one at a time, how, besides the life insurance policy that was on Eric's business, what was the amount of money that Eric's life was insured for at the time of his death?
About $1.2 million, aside from the business buy-sell policy.
And are you familiar with any attempt to change the beneficiary of the business policy?
I'm aware that that is the report, yes.
And what was the report?
That on New Year's Day of 2022, that in New York Life's online portal, someone had logged in and had changed the beneficiaries on that policy to Corey Richens.
Okay. And that was changed back, as far as you know, had been changed back at the time of Eric's death?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Do you know how much money the defendant got in insurance payouts?
$1.3 million, a little bit more than that, 1.3 million in June of 2022.
Okay. Can I just have a minute, Your Honor?
Of course.
I have a couple more questions, Your Honor. Were you able to review the PenFed accounts at any time?
Yes.
Do you recall if there was any money in those accounts?
For most of the time, I reviewed a little bit over a year, I believe. Most of the time it had $5 in it.
Okay. Right. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I'm
Ms.
going to be
Lazar.
really quick because I'm going to pretend that's the LD so I don't lose my.
Well, this takes what it takes.
Okay.
They're on notice that I'm otherwise engaged.
Okay. I needed that. Ms. Carrington, a couple of questions. Want to talk about, pursuant to your testimony, you've been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
And you look at investment type businesses as well as personal finances, correct?
That's correct.
As the course of your review of things. And you said that Corey Richens Realty was essentially flipping homes, correct? As a business?
That's my understanding from what's publicly available. Yeah.
And in your experience, that type of a business model is essentially investment properties that you don't own very long and then you resell, correct?
Yes.
So within the framework of that, it would not be uncommon or uncharacteristic to have these hard money lenders as a part of that type of business model, correct?
Yes, and that, I did say that earlier,
Okay.
that that's typical.
Right,
yes.
we wouldn't go get conventional home loans for a home we're gonna own for, 6 months, we hope, correct?
You could. That would be a lot lower interest rate. Even though it had a longer repayment period, someone could get a conventional loan to do that.
It would be hard to continue to get conventional loans, I would assume, when you're buying multiple properties, correct?
I don't know the answer to that. What I will say is it's very typical for someone in this industry that Ms. Richens is in to get hard money lenders.
So what she was doing was typical for the industry?
I would say yes.
Okay. And you created this schedule of homes. Did you also look at when those homes sold?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you correlate those payments?
Correlate.
Like, were
I'm
you
sorry.
able to see what the homes sold for?
I have been able to see many of them what they sold for.
Okay. So, and then if you look at those, she only still owns a handful of those, correct? Like 4, maybe 5.
I'm sorry, what?
She only
period?
still currently owns just a small handful of those homes, correct?
I think she still owns about 6 or 8.
So she owns the ones on Canyons Resort Drive that are rental properties, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And she owns the Saratoga Springs house.
Yes.
Okay, and
She still owns the condo in B Street in Salt Lake City.
correct, in the Heber City?
Yes, she does. It's under joint tenancy, and K. Richens Realty is still on the title on that.
And were you able to see on any of these hard money loans if she'd partnered with anyone on them? It's not just a hard money loan, but if there were any partnership.
The trust deeds do not indicate a partnership.
Okay, so you wouldn't known if there was some other partnership that existed on these?
Yes, that would be reflected in the trust deed, and I did not see any partnership on any of them.
Okay. Were you able to see what the balance in the 2204 account as part of your review of,
At what time period?
at any time period? Did you look at the 2204?
I did,
Account
yes,
as well?
yes.
Okay. And although there were fluctuations in her business account, that account always had sufficient funds in it, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. There was a period of time where it did not.
There are periods of time,
Okay.
yes.
And you also said that Eric was on this 5244 account that was being used for essentially business type stuff. And that was Corey's business, not Eric's, is that correct?
You're asking me a couple of things.
Okay, sorry, I'll slow down. He's
That's
on the
okay, no, it's
account.
fine, it's fine. He's on the signature card. So
Okay.
when an account is opened, he signed as an authorized signer, she signed as an authorized signer.
Okay.
As
So
I-
he would have, as an authorized signer, he would have access if he wanted to go review what that account was doing, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
That all depends on how it's set up with the online access. Just because someone's an authorized signer doesn't mean that they can come in and walk into the bank and get any information they want.
Were you,
And
were you able to tell in this case?
well, as I said, the bank statement does not say Eric and Corey Richens, it says Corey Richens. And so, and looking at the transactions in the account, before I looked at the signature card, it looked very much like a business account that Corey would have.
Okay. And are you aware that Eric was in the stonemasonry business, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so he was, on some level, assisting her in the remodel or cleanup of some of these homes, correct?
That is not how I would term it.
I'm not saying financially. Are you aware that he was doing work on these homes?
I'm aware of one instance on the Franson Lane home in which he and Cody contributed about $133,000 toward the completion of the home, and my understanding is different than
Okay.
how you're portraying.
Okay.